by the Center for Public Policy Research. I am Anu Maria Francis, Senior Associate Research and Project Management at CPPR, the moderator of the day. Today's topic of discussion is on gender budgeting in India and allocations and outcomes. So before we move on to the conversation, let me briefly set the context. So India has now been implementing gender responsive budgeting for over last 2 decades. It started formally in 2005-06. And over the years, we have witnessed a steady expansion of both allocations as well as the institutional mechanisms. What has been kind of a policy innovation has gradually become an embedded feature in the union budget process as well as documents. So for those who are very new to this framework, just to give a context, gender budget statement appears as statement number 13 in the union budget documents and has traditionally been divided into 2 parts, which is part A and part B. And part A includes the schemes with 100% allocation for women. These are women-specific programs like Nirbhaya funds, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and all that. And part B generally includes schemes where at least 30% of the allocation is intended for women. Generally, broader schemes like the MGNREJs fall under part B. And from 2025-26 onwards, we have also seen the introduction of a part C into the traditional part A and part B. This includes schemes where there is less than 30% of the allocation goes to women. But so the expansion probably signals an attempt to capture the wider gender footprint of the public expenditure. Institutionally, the Ministry of Women and Child Development serves as the nodal agency, the nodal ministry. So they provide the guidelines, coordinate with all the departments, and offers technical support. So today, more than 50 central ministries and departments have established gender budgeting cells. To be very specific, I think 57 ministries have gender budgeting cells under the gender budgeting framework. And these cells, generally, they are meant to review schemes through a gender lens before the budget demands are finalized. Similarly, many states have also institutionalized their own gender budget statements, and Kerala is one of them. At the state level, Kerala continues to have a transgender budgeting also, because I think that is the only state have a transgender component to it. We have around 7.58 crore which is allocated for transgenders in 2026-27 budget. Notably, the union budget missed this part. And also a bit of a gender mainstreaming is also done into the planning of the local governments as well in Kerala. So that is one of the best practices which we can definitely portray. How the scale of gender budgeting as a whole, when we look at the union budget, it has reached I would say, notable milestone, because the total allocation has gone up from last year. This now accounts for about 9.37% of the total union budget expenditure this year. And about 49 ministries and departments, along with 5 union territories, have participated in the gender budgeting exercise. So given this context, but there are still significant gaps. There is critical questions like whether this quantitative expansion has actually translated into a structural change. So this is something that we will be going to discuss in this webinar, because there are persistent gaps in care infrastructure, safety initiatives, especially that move beyond capital expenditure to systemic reforms. So they remain uneven. So this raises a broader policy challenge. So if the budgeting is remaining focused primarily on reporting allocations without a clear linkage to measurable outcomes, so there is a clear challenge or a risk that it reinforces welfare-oriented support and enabling transformative shifts. So we have 2 amazing panelists with us to discuss this in detail. So firstly, I welcome Dr. Vibhuti Patel. She's an economist and a professor, retired from Advanced Center for Women Studies, School of Development Studies, TIS, Mumbai. She earned her BA and MA in economics from MS University, Baroda, and her PhD from University of Mumbai. And she was a Commonwealth postdoctoral fellow at London School of Economics. And she also served as a head of economics at SNDT Women's University. So with over 4 decades of research, her work focuses on women's work participation, gender inequalities, developmental economics, and intersectionality. So welcome, ma'am, to the CPPR dialogue. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Dr. Sona Mitra. Senior Advisor to IWH, Institute for What Works to Advance Gender Equality. She's also a visiting researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University, South Africa. She worked in the area of women, labor, and development for closely 2 decades and specializes in improving women's engagement with care economy and measurement of work. She has also worked as a technical consultant with several UN entities and other international organizations. Welcome, Dr. Sona, to the discussion. So before we start the discussion, a gentle reminder to the audience who have joined us in Zoom, as well as who are seeing the live stream in YouTube. Please post your questions on the Zoom chat or the YouTube comments. So we will take them up towards the end. So now I think we'll start with the discussion of the day. So I would like to start with you, Dr. Vibhuti, ma'am. So like I gave the context, over the past 2 decades, we have seen that GRV has increased in terms of allocations. And we track the size of gender budget statement every year, the proportion of total expenditure it represents, the number of ministries participating, and also the expansion, like Part A became Part A and Part B, now we have a Part C as well. So these are definitely important markers of institutionalization and political commitment. But in your opinion, do you think the success of GRB primarily be assessed in terms of allocations and coverage? Should it be judged by improvements in measuring outcomes with specific sectors? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Ms. Anu Maria Francis, for choosing us for this panel discussion. It's very important that now we are discussing not only just the allocation, but also what is the performance analysis of the gender responsive budgeting, because we have completed now 21 years of gender responsive budgeting, and around 8 to 10 states are also giving us separate gender budget statement. And still there are 8 to 10 or more states which have to start even the process of gender responsive budgeting. But as you said, that 57 ministries have formed gender budget cells. And but still what we say that the money gets parked, outlay is there, and everyone only focuses on outlay, all the elected representatives as well as the finance minister, because the higher figure in outlay is treated to be the achievement, but that is not that is not an achievement, because outcome is very, very important, and also the impact, what has been the gender equality impact, and also the transformative impact that it has had. So current indicators, they offer lack adequacy because they focus only on the spending amount rather than actual changes in gender equality at a ground level, and they are frequently hindered. And when this kind of practical gender needs are addressed, in fact, the UNDP and the NIRD study also shows that gender responsive budgeting has addressed the practical gender needs, where you don't challenge the patriarchal order or patriarchal value system, but it is basically, it reduces drudgery and provides more services of the state, which are very important for whole community, because there is the whether you get more water or electrification or bus stand that you get. But when it comes to the strategic gender needs, it's very, very you get a lot of opposition, bureaucratic lethargy, lack of political will. The most important example in front of us is the Nirbhaya funds. Right from 2013, we have 1,000 crore allocated, but what is the performance? Hardly 5-6 states are using it, that to 40 to 60%. I have been in a gender responsive budget workshops by the state governments, where principal secretary would just shun me by saying that we don't want Swadhar fund in our state, because if we create Swadhar Ghar, all these Gujarati girls will start running away, and it will disintegrate the family system. So if this is the mindset of the IAS officers, you can imagine the kind of, whenever you are talking about whether it's a Saksham program or Sambal program, in that you see massive non-utilized fund is mainly because of that. So narrow focus on only women specific and gender mainstream is only dealing with women, but you don't challenge the gender binary, that also leaves out 4% of the population who happen to be gender diverse and third gender people, which you said that only Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they are the only ones who have responded to that. Chhattisgarh, to some extent, has come up with the gender neutral toilets for the trans community. So I think I see main problem is that of a lack of political will, and also the bureaucratic lethargy, not getting enough proposal for so many schemes under gender budgeting, whether it is education or health or skill development or addressing gender-based violence, one-stop crisis center. Everywhere you see so much of ad hocism is there. And even most of the state governments have also not done enough publicity in the regional language. We remember when in 2005, when the gender budget came, Maharashtra government had prepared a booklet in Marathi about all the schemes and the amount that was there under centrally sponsored scheme, and also the scheme of the state governments. And that was distributed to all panchayats, no? And then they got the proposal. So I think a lot has to be done at that level in terms of even just keeping everything on website is not solving the problem. The community has to know that what are the services they need, and then only we will have a very utilization of fund, which is very important. So only impressive outlay should not be there, because that's what they are saying, that okay, earlier it was 3%, now if we are 5%, now we are talking of 7 and 8% of allocation. But how much is it utilized, and whether it is reaching the population who mainly deserves it, I think is a very important problem.
I can echo with you, ma'am, because recently we did a project on strengthening institutional mechanisms compacting violence against women in 5 states of India. And one of the common things which I found is like we have one-stop centers in most of the districts. In Kerala, I think we have it across all 14 districts. But when I go for some outreach programs in any of the colleges in Kerala, and when I ask this question to the girls and boys, whether they know about such a system that exists, but I have never got an answer which say yes. So that is a kind of, I think, like what you said, people are not knowing that these systems exist. So coming to Dr. Sona, recently that we have in the time use data, which is released by the government as well, we see that women spend disproportionately higher hours in unpaid domestic work compared to men. So do you think that if we move beyond allocations and examine sectoral outcomes, can we clearly establish that gender budgeted interventions are improving women's labor force participation? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Thank you. First, let me thank you for having this conversation and having me with Vibhuti, who has been one of the people who has also taught me, when she was doing gender budgeting, one of the pioneers. So we have learned a lot in the journey for 2 decades of gender budgeting in India. And one of the reasons why this whole exercise was taken up was to identify the whole and identify entry points. That is what they call entry points for understanding the needs of women in the economy. And one of the most important things that were being discussed, and why how gender budgeting as a concept or as a tool was was made made useful and used actively by economists, policymakers, budget analysts across nations across the world, was that women are actually doing a lot of work in the economy, contributing invisibly to the economy, yet they are not being recognized for their contribution. So I think one of the basics of developing the tool came from the understanding. And if we go to the writings of scholars like Professor Diane Nelson or Debbie Butlinder, who has been like, the pioneers of creating this framework and then developing the tool further, the gender responsive budgeting tool for the world, actually. Um, I mean, the major entry point is how do you incorporate women into macroeconomic policies? And the reason was that for the longest time, um, women have been struggling to just, make their efforts and contribution in the unpaid care economy visible. So the 3R framework that Professor Elson devised in the late 1980s, the recognize, reduce, redistribute, which actually gives a backbone to the entire tool or entire application of gender responsive budgeting. So the first point was that one has to bring this um, whole contribution, the one has to bring this whole idea that women are never unemployed, even when they are not working, even when they are not being paid for what they are doing, they are still contributing to the economy by indirectly. And that indirect contribution is so crucial that one day of no unpaid work by women can actually collapse economies and nations. And that recognition was not there, which is one of the reasons why gender responsive budgeting was actually born out of these considerations. One of the first step to gender responsive budgeting was actually about understand. I mean, there was the once the tool was developed, there was a 5-step framework, and one of the first things that one needed to do was a situational analysis of every geography that the gender responsive budgeting would be applied to. So a situation analysis would say that it was needed to identify the entry points where one can identify what women needed in different sectors of the economy and how those needs could be incorporated and integrated within the broader macroeconomic policy design of the economy. And once that was done, I mean, that situation analysis would actually say that, okay, this is what women are currently. These are the development indicators disaggregated by gender, which shows the gaps, highlight the gaps. This is the gap that needs to be closed. And to close these gaps, these are the requirements that women need. So we have this situation analysis followed by a planning and budgeting exercise, and then we move into allocating resources for the programs developed to close the gaps. And in that, if you ask me, in India, these first 3 steps in the last 2 decades have been followed extremely well. There are two more steps in terms of monitoring and evaluation of this entire exercise, where we try to understand whether the gender gaps which are recognized, say in 2000s, when the discussions around gender budgeting started, whether those gaps have closed or not. And then you ask me about the labor force, women's labor force participation and their connection with unpaid economy, as well as the role of time use surveys. So I would like to say that um, what happened was that while India adopted gender responsive budgeting in its spirit from the beginning, there has been phases in which the GRB as a tool in India picked up in the initial years, doing a very careful planning with the working group of feminist economics, which was created by the planning committee then. And they actually, the 10th plan, the 11th plan, and the 12th plan, which was the last plan, is a major example of how entry points could be identified to close the gender gaps in every sector. So basically, gender budgeting was a very powerful tool to give us a framework where at every stage one could create these gender indicators that could be incorporated. Now, simultaneously, along that, when we were talking about closing gaps for women and girls in education, in health outcomes, there were economic outcomes also. And that is the time when women's labor force participation was also starting to decline. So therefore, there was a need to understand why the labor force participation for women was declining. And I think the gender responsive budgeting as an exercise actually was unable to understand or pick that up initially. And for a very long time was not being able to pick that up. It did that much later And one of the major reasons for that was there was no data to say that, okay, women are contributing to the unpaid economy and they are bound by their responsibilities in the care economy, and they are also perceived caregivers, primary caregivers of the economy, and hence they are not being able to access the job market because they are, one, perceived as a flexible labor force who is not needing, who doesn't need full-time work, is happy with part-time work, is happy to have lower wages and work at very low levels of employment, work for few hours in the day, because that helps them maintain their work-life balance, which is another way to say that women are basically very I mean, they are the ones who are responsible to take care of the children, to take care of the elderly, to manage the household, to do every kind of work which doesn't pay them. And that took a lot of time to identify, and which is why there was a need to strengthen the data systems. And that was one of the core of gender responsive budgeting. So the Time Use survey, which was first done in 98, gave us an idea of what women were doing. But in 2019, it was done again for the entire country. And the results were not so different. They were so similar. And it actually showed that even in 24 data, it shows that women in India have a particularly severe case of sharing a disproportionate burden of unpaid work. More than 80% of all unpaid work in India is performed by women, and women spend 5 hours on an average day on doing unpaid work compared to men who spend around 30 minutes. This had a direct impact on women for joining the labor force, for earning greater incomes. And once these numbers came to the front, we could use them in the gender responsive budgeting tool as gender indicators. And that's when, in the last 2 years, at least I would say, not two, but last 2 to 3 years, I would say that there is a momentum in terms of acknowledging that women are not able to join the labor force because they have a lot of unpaid work responsibility, and there is a need to provide enabling support mechanism infrastructure for women so that they can reduce that work, the time spent on that work, and come to the labor force. That way, gender responsive budgeting in India in the last 2 to 3 years has helped. If you ask me the next question about what it has done, how the numbers show, again, numbers show many things, but there are several other concerns. It can be high allocations, yet results we are not seeing. Female labor force participation has increased in the last 2 years, but we are very concerned about the quality of work that women are doing currently. I will stop here for
Yeah,
this
thank you.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive explanation about the question. Yeah, I think I have a question to Vibhuti, ma'am, quite related to this, what Sona ma'am was talking about. Like she was talking that about the gender responsive budgeting and how the entry points are being identified and so. So do you think actually like when the gender budget allocations are being provided by the ministries, reported by the ministries, how far women actually are part of the planning process? Like, do you think there is a prior need assessment, like sectoral planning, demonstrating the demands of women in real? What
I
do you
think
think?
initially it was a post facto. After the budget was presented, the postmortem was done and analysis was provided. But we have seen increasingly several states, like for example, all southern states, Bengal and Maharashtra, in the pre-budget sessions, we start from July. There only gender economists are invited, and plus state commissions for women they also have pre-budget discussions where the inputs are accepted. Main thing is that they are more in terms of abstractions and generalizations, that okay, we need education, health, gender gap in education, health, skill development, decision making, governance should be reduced, and gender-based violence has to be taken up as a priority. But as I think Dr. Sona Mitra said, that we need a gender disaggregated data, no area-wise. Like in the human development report, when we are working as an economist, we are given block-wise data, like Maharashtra has a 375 blocks. We are given data, all human development indicators are given to us. So why not to connect it? Because you have a data of the targeted intervention, but that doesn't happen, no? So but that is the reason where you see that the schemes and programs are there, but they are so many times they remain funds remain unutilized, or so they are not even region specific. You have a general like centrally sponsored schemes. They are general schemes. Another thing is that panchayats are starved of funds. We talk of democratic decentralization, but there is no financial decentralization. And they are the first person contact for the community for any kind of a developmental intervention. So Ministry of Panchayati Raj has to be very, they have to be more respected. Their voice should be heard. And if we talk about the bottom-up budgeting, which Dr. Devki Jain and Alia Bhatt were training the bureaucrats and politicians during 80s and 90s, I think we need to have a more decision-making power of the Panchayati Raj institutions. Other things that marginalized groups, scheduled caste, we have SCP budgets, no scheduled caste budget. So many times it gets diverted. Commonwealth Games, their whole fund for Delhi state was diverted for So why did it happen? It was only when the Dalit organizations became very vocal and they filed public interest litigation that happened. Same thing, the fund for the hunger deaths in Orissa, that was also diverted for some other purpose, no? And then the PUCL had to file public interest litigation. TSP funds, abysmal utilization of TSP, tribal subplan funds. Rarely you see, except for 7 northeastern states where the proposals come, and Meghalaya has the best record because they always present deficit budget. They finish off whatever the centrally sponsored schemes are, which is very good, because then the next year you can demand more. So that's what happened. And some of the areas are totally neglected. For example, disabled persons, for persons with disability. Now they have started giving their charter of demand much in advance. Senior citizens organization everywhere in India we have, and they are also giving their charter of demand in advance, so that there is separate listing of their demands are looked after in the budget. And similarly, the transgender persons, even after 2019 Act, we have not been able to, first of all, not provide the census, the age-wise needs of transgender community. How many should be given pension? How many should be given Garima Group? How many Garima Group? Except for Maharashtra, there has not been many proposals for Garima Group. We have a highest number of Garima Groups, 87 Garima Groups. Some of the Garima Groups are totally funded by the private funding, because the bureaucratic lethargy is so much that even if they send proposal, they are not respected. And the unit cost is so less. The same thing about the sports. Sports were very, what gender responsiveness do you see in the for sports ministry's budget? The unit cost for the men and boys for sport and the facilities which they have in terms of practicing session and hostel and the transport cost, all is covered when it comes to boys. But when it comes to girls and women in the sports, they hardly unit cost comes to some 12 rupees or so, which is ridiculously low. So I think we have to go more into the nitty-gritty and the glitches that we are facing at an operational level. Otherwise, fund will remain unutilized. And the regional variation and more flexibility to be given, and the states are starved of funds. We are seeing in last 6 years, what are the subnational level, even at the time of pandemic, what you take the GST from the state governments and not give them adequate fund to implement the program. So there are top-down problems at the top, problems at an operational level, and problems at not having any sync between what people want and what women want, or people facing intersectional marginality based on caste, ethnicity, religion, disability, language, even the location, rural and urban, that those disparities also need to be addressed by talking. So the policies are equally important, and I think that connect between policy and the budgetary allocation, and in terms of funds, functions, functionaries. I think Ms. Sonaji showed it very well. Yeah.
So Vibhuti ma'am, since you were talking about local governments and their role, So do you think currently we have a very limited fiscal autonomy when it comes to the third tier of the
Very
government?
much, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we only talk about democratic decentralization and we talk about people's participation. But in a market economy, anything which is not backed by the financial allocation, how do you don't how do you achieve anything? No. So that is, I think, is a very important bottleneck that we are facing so far as improving the human development indicators of the state, of the different states. No, so that is very, and currently, like what Kerala has announced, like free education from pre-primary to your graduation. I think it's a very welcome step. But I'm really worried that how are we going to manage in terms of revenue generation, revenue expenditure, and to what extent centrally sponsored scheme, because Kerala is a state, so it will get only centrally sponsored scheme. It's only the union territories where the central schemes 100% money comes from the central government. But one can say that there are certain newer elements, like so many union territories which were earlier not doing gender budgeting. Now you see that because gender budgeting has also become a mandatory subject for all refresher courses, orientation programs, ministerial program like Labor Ministry or Ministry of Women and Child, continuous programs are going on. Not only that we get bureaucrats and politicians from other developing countries also in India for for the training on gender budgeting. So awareness has increased, and some of them who are young officers who are motivated, they are also sending such proposal. I was in Ladakh for gender budget training. First time Ladakh is going. They applied funds for Mission Shakti. It was a young TISS graduate who sent the proposal. Proposal was accepted, and it is a union territory, so they managed to get 100% centrally sponsored central schemes. And then all the officers were, it was mandatory for all the officers of all departments of Ladakh to attend and also work on that. And they took help of several academic institutes like TISS or to establish one-stop crisis center. Maternal mortality and child mortality is very high because you can see all of them are in the hilltop, and when the labor pain starts, you don't, they can't be immediately taken. So Janani Suraksha Yojana we have, but Janani Suraksha Yojana in the context of, say, Bombay or Gujarat would be very different. In 2 hours, in half an hour, ambulance can reach. But in place like Ladakh, you need a helicopter to pick up the woman in labor and take her to the civil hospital. No, so I think these regional variations we need to keep into consideration by allocating funds. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So in relation to this, Dr. Sona, do you think like should finance commissions take this up when they incorporate, like whether they should incorporate gender-based criteria when it comes to devolutions? What do you think? What is your take on that?
Yeah, actually, there has been a sustained, ask for devolution based on the gender composition of the states, the population and the sex ratio of the. But somewhere, for the longest time, that has not been accepted by any of the finance commission. And the arguments that have been given have been various, that, the devolutions cannot, has to be gender neutral. It should not have all these specificities marked, because if it is gender, then there can be many other communities. They can also ask for such, but devolutions are only based on certain factors and not really on the representativeness in the population or the marginalized the share of marginalized person in the state. Now, having said that, um, I would rather say that finance commission devolutions have become extremely important right now, given the state fiscal constraints that they are facing, as well as the stretches on the finances. Now, that is happening because of two reasons. One is that most of the big bang programs, which we used to call centrally sponsored schemes, earlier had a much bigger share of the central government allocations. Right now, a large part of it is now being transferred to the states, and the states are supposed to spend money on most of the social sector schemes, and the union government is actually taking away its responsibility. It is focusing more on capital expenditure, which is rising as part of total expenditure. While we have actually we have around 27 states adopting gender responsive budgeting. Around 12 states in India take out gender budget statements regularly. Not all of them take out, but they have gender integration of their planning systems and everything. And what we see is the states who had adopted gender responsive budgeting in the initial years are doing much better in terms of unlocking money towards social sector directed towards women's empowerment or child welfare or any of the social sector by bringing together ministries to see how unspent funds can be converged and then they can be spent. One of the best examples of this in the recent times has been the Kusina money in Karnataka, which actually was about creches for construction workers and also also catering to the demand for expanding the Anganwadi centers in those areas. Now, what happened was that there was so much, I mean, the money from rural development, the money from labor and employment, labor departments, rural development departments, and WCD departments, all the unspent funds were brought together to spend on expanding this entire Kusina money so that children around the areas of the construction work, not only within the MGNREGA, but also I mean, whoever required a center would be given that, and that could be done successfully only because some of the champions within the bureaucracy in the state were actually extremely had the political will and the intention of making this happen. But the way that they struggled for funds was something, and they also brought together the funds. That was some very, very big learning example. The other state is the one that we keep talking about and giving example is Kerala. But the way Kerala has developed its GRB strategy, integrating within the planning approach so well, it is very difficult for any other state to right now follow. They are not in that state. So we'll keep that aside because it has gone to several other levels. The second problem the states are facing right now is that every state is competing with each other in terms of providing unconditional cash to women as part of the women's empowerment programs. And that is, of course, a political step or a political, what to say, it's a political tool, basically. And yet, the states are doing that. And I would tell you that the recently concluded Bihar elections actually stretched so much that 22% of the state expenditure had gone towards paying women on that unconditional cash transfer program. Of course, there were, I'm not going to put the two together, but of course, after that, the elections also happened and there were results and everything. But most of the states are also getting into this putting cash in women's hand. Now, there's a big debate about, arising out of that giving these unconditional money in women's hands, whether that is going to keep the whole question and the whole momentum around gender responsive budgeting viable at all. Because, you are giving money to the women and they are supposed to spend it for what they want. Whereas gender responsive budgeting is about state taking up responsibility for closing the gender gaps. And whether making the states pay so much money to women in their hands is actually stretching their finances that they're not being able to now pay for the social sector programs. Given these two constraints, the devolution, and coming back to your question, the devolution becomes extremely important. What we see are the trends where the central government is increasingly increasing the components of cess and surcharges, despite being reminded so many times for so many years that, this is not divisible. This is out of the divisible pool. Yet we have a lot of money which the central government is actually holding and not sharing. This year, the finance minister said that 41% of the taxes are going to be devolved to the states. And the 16th Finance Commission has also followed the 15th Finance Commission's recommendation of 42%. So they have said. But effectively, when you see what the state devolutions are at the middle of the year, when the revised estimates are calculated, it doesn't go beyond 35%. Because the transfers, the state transfers, some of the transfers have also become conditional and tied to certain conditionalities of the union government. And those conditionalities again are increasing. I mean, we are basically moving towards a situation where 10 to 15 years ago, we were telling the states that you have to devolve unconditional money and transfers to your local governments for a decentralized planning. But right now, we are again going back in the circle, in the loop, to tell the central government that we have to provide states with unconditional transfers. We have to give them money, give them the shares of cesses, surcharges, or not collect it in a cess and surcharge format and collect it in a divisible format. Because most of the functions on social justice is actually getting transferred to the states. So, yeah, I mean, we can only say up to this so far, because there has not been any phenomenal change in the 16th Finance Commission recommendation compared to the 15th Finance Commissions when it comes to gender integration, like taking care of the women's empowerment needs.
So do you see any hope in bringing that, I mean, the change coming into picture sometime soon, at least in the next one?
I see the next finance commission will again happen in so
5
many
years.
years.
Yeah.
It is already done and now for the next 5 years, we are bound with this.
Yeah.
The only thing that can actually change is if there is a lot of pressure on the government, because you see, the government is also centralized with the with the GST. The states are deprived of those taxes as well, right? So so on the one hand, the state is losing tools on mobilizing revenues, and on the other hand, there's an increasing pressure from center on states to spend on social services and social sector departments. So what is happening right now? I don't see anything that is going to revolutionize or bring about better changes in this process. What I see in the process is the states turning to ADBs and World Banks, which they are already doing, for spending on social sector, and in the form of not grants or granting aids, but in the form of taking loans, which is increasing. If you look at the states of Bihar, Jharkhand, it's Telangana, it's already in the process.
Yeah. Kerala, that is also increasing
And
with respect to social sector spending.
Yes.
So yeah, so I think I'll come back to the basics, Vibhuti ma'am. I would like to get your perspective on introduction of the Part C into the budget. So do you see that this expansion is just trying to, like, whether it is just primarily inflating the figures without proportional clarity on the intensity, quality, or do you think it reflects a deeper gender mainstreaming?
Yeah, I think it's just to impress the people that we have been doing, but actually what we see that everything is connected to digitalization. No, so whatever schemes you have, people are most of even when you say that conditional cash transfer to or even the state governments in a pre-election period are transferring. So Maharashtra's record shows that most of them have not got. They were happy. It was a good for election propaganda, but it is connected to digital this thing, facial identification and biometric, and all these working class women from the marginalized section, their biometric doesn't recognize them. And that is why they don't get even MG Narega workers. Like they have said that they work for a whole day, but they have to send their biometric by evening. And most of the time it does. So that whole day's labor is gone. So there is so much of underpayment. I would call it wage theft that is happening in the name of employment guarantee scheme. No, so that is very important. When we talked about Kerala, I think one thing we need to remember that the social sector budget for Kerala is 40%, which none of the states have. That itself gives you a large scope to have most of the anti-poverty programs touch the remotest part and the last mile connectivity with the people who are marginalized and those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. That can happen. While elsewhere, after 1991, we have seen that social sector funding in the state budgets has also gone down. During the pandemic, yes, they had to, because there was such a big risk for the state also in terms of loss of loss of population, workforce. No? So they took up some state took up very good initiative in intervention. But otherwise, everything is left to market. Privatization of healthcare, you take 4% cess for education and health. What you give in return is less than 1% of GDP to the health budget, less than 2.5% to the education. So these are the two major requirements where you are leaving everything to the private sector. Main thing of all the scheme workers, more than 1 crore scheme workers, we have Anganwadi workers, Asha workers, midday meal, what is their salary? 36 rupees per day. That's what they are given for the midday meal program. So these are the basic entitlements of the workforce where the state is employer. In that also you have not been able to meet. And some states have a political will to give. For example, Kerala said that they are ready to give higher wages to Asha workers, but they don't. The center doesn't in any way collaborate in terms of increasing the percentage of centrally sponsored schemes. So that is there. Another thing that more money given in the hands of women, and I think that also is linked to a similar example we have of widow's pension. Different states are giving different amount, 200, or 2,000 to 500, 1,000. But that doesn't improve the status unless you challenge the gender norm, unless you provide the community, and the state also provides various types of financial steps also need to be taken for their empowerment. Like if you see recent studies on the intra-household distribution of food, even after getting more money, the quality of food has improved. But women got it. They are the ones who eat last list and leftover. No, Arushi Shukla's article in Sunday's Indian Express shows that it doesn't. So mainly along with the allocation gender responsive budgeting, we also need to equally vociferously and proactively need to work to change the gender norms in the society. And like our organization, Sehat, works with the One-Stop Crisis Center with the 13 municipal corporations, the ad hocism that you see, even we have such a large amount of funding allocated to address gender-based violence. Most of the time, the one-stop crisis centers are starved of funding. We have announced more than 800 one-stop crisis centers throughout the country after the pandemic, but most of them are just for the namesake. Actually, nothing, no kind of support. And these centers have to provide 5 types of support: counseling, then medical care, criminal contact with the police, support in the legal battle, and shelter. All 5 issues, they are starved of funding. So even money is parked there in the ministry, and there is a caveat also: the Nirbhaya fund cannot be diverted. If it is leftover fund, you have to carry forward. So you can imagine from 2013 to now, what has been the fund? Plus, most of the flagship schemes, when you talk about the Part B, where 30% goes to women and women's cause, none of the ministries or departments have given data whether they have actually utilized these 30% of this flagship program, whether it is about the MG Narega or integrated village development program, or even Ministry of Minorities Affairs. They this kind of, we are not. Number of crashes have gone down. In the 80s and 90s, we had crashes in thousands. Now we have in hundreds, 300, 400. So all the state supported crashes have been closed down. And now you see that there is allocation of funds under Rajiv Gandhi Palnagar scheme. But what happens to this scheme? Has any audit been done? There is an organization, Forces, organization of Women's Studies Center, women's organizations and trade unions. So many times they have approached the ministry to provide the support system, institutional and systemic support. But this has not happened. And finally, what we see, whole of childcare facilities in the hands of commercial sector, which is so unaffordable. So women end up giving up their job, and they can't enter the workforce.
So, yeah, I just have I mean, this is kind of a curious question. Like, we have in the gender budget, especially in Part A, we have this LPG connection for poor households. Around 9,200 crores is being allocated for that. So doesn't that gives a kind of a signaling that this is a women's work? Like, because it's 100% women being beneficiaries. What do you think, like, about that kind of categorization?
And I think this type of gender norms have been strengthened in a post-pandemic period, no? That man as a breadwinner and roti kamane wala, and women as a homemaker. And I think so many politicians have also gave elan, no, in different states, like starting with superstar Kamal Hassan ji, who said that housewife should be compensated. So I think it also accepts the gender-based division of labor, that cooking, cleaning, caring, and the unpaid work, any non-market activity is a domain of women. So that is So recognition is one thing, to come up with the policies that paid and unpaid care work both should be treated with dignity, and the reward should be given to the paid care workers. So that is a one. But we need to. Nobody is talking about challenging the gender norms. On the contrary, the current religious and cultural atmosphere is such that they are strengthening the gender norms, no, and vilifying women who want to self-actualization and be productive in the public life.
I think Sona ma'am has something to add too.
Yes, I wanted to go back to your Part C question, and I just wanted to say that, in 2019, the finance minister had announced a committee, a broad-based gender budgeting committee, which would be hosted by the MWCD. And incidentally, I was part of that committee, and as one of the very strong recommendations that we had provided was to strengthen the gender budget statement, which could be used as a tool for looking at the quality of expenditure made for women. The idea was and we had suggested that there could be a Part C or a third part to the gender budget, which would also provide the extent of expenditure on very small schemes of the ministries that could get into the entire gender budget, but not with the idea of inflating the gender budget, but definitely with the idea of rationalizing the expenditures on women for particular targets. What we see now is that the share of Part C in the entire gender budget is around 6%.
Yes.
And Part B, which was always dominant, continues to dominate at around 70%. And Part A, alarmingly, is actually reducing, because if we look at the allocations this year, it comes to more than 20%. But when we see the revised estimates, it just goes down below 20%. I mean, it becomes 18%, when we started, it was more than 20 to 25%. So that is one of the I think one of the very important ways of looking at the gender budget statement and using it for actually meeting the targets, which we are not doing. If you look at all the parts, you will find that there are only these very pervasive programs which take away 50% of the entire allocation. Now, for the Part C, it is strange because this year 33 ministries or 37 ministries have reported in Part C, yet it constitutes of 6%. So what is this amount? Is it really going to make an impact? That is one question that we need to ask if you are really serious. And in that, 50% of that Part C, 51% of that allocation is for PM Kisan. It's like that. And if you look at what is allocated from the PM Kisan in the gender budget Part C, that is 28%. So it's below 30% and it has got into Part C. So that's one thing. In Part A, Awas Yojana takes away, all of that big, and this time it has got a big dip. So the allocations have reduced. But I think one of the what you asked about these LPG, I mean, we have been saying this like every time this is reported in Part A, the PN Ministry of Petroleum and Gas, the LPG connection should not be part of Part A, but still it gets reported as an allocation to women, even despite the fact that the connections sometimes are not in the name of women. It is in the name of the head of the household. So how does it make sense? So that is something that we have been saying. But I would also like to give credit to the government on gender budget statement by saying that, with time, they have actually moved out these ridiculous schemes from Part A to Part B. So I'm hoping that even for this Ujjwala Yojana or LPG connection, whatever, they will eventually move it from Part A into Part B. But hopefully, because initially the number of ministries that were reporting under Part A was 16. Now it has come down to 10. And Part C has increased from 1 to 37 in these years. And um, and Part B, of course, is around again 30, below 30, below. So those are, I mean, these are things that we need to talk about in terms of strengthening the gender budget statement. When you talk and when you talk about stereotypes, I would go back to what Vibhuti ma'am was saying, that norms are already there, and there has to be an awareness. There has to be a proactive campaigns on changing the norms and proactive interventions, not only in the form of campaigns, but proactive interventions by the state, rather than putting this LPG connection in Part A and stereotyping women into the space of cooking. So it's very contradictory. On the one hand, in the budget speech, the finance minister says that we need to bring more women out of the households into the labor force. Yet you see that this is reported in Part A where it is 100%. So there are contradictions. Sometimes we just need to point this out, then it works, because these are very easy things to do. But the main question lies that what is the use of having a Part B, Part C, which doesn't explain what the expenditure is actually doing to the women on ground, whether it is really closing gaps or not. How is it that, even if you look at the MWCT budget, it is ICTS, which takes away 80% of their budget, poor things. And then you have Part A, which goes to Awas Yojana, Part B, which will again, rural development takes away majority because of the Gramin and Gramji now and Manrega. So I think one needs to push for better expenditure for women in several sectors, and that we have not been able to do with the use of gender budgeting. Those 5 ministries which were doing very well in the beginning continues to do well in the 20 years. We have not made the entry points very strong for other ministries.
I'll move on to the audience questions because it's already 3:56. So there are a few
I just
questions.
wanted to add one sentence with
Sure,
what
sure,
Dr.
sure.
Sona Mitra said, that even why should you even crash be in Part A, no? Why it's not 100% women. So many men in reality are looking after children, single parent, and so that is there. And also the working women's hostel, now this time the announcement is made, every district we will have one working women's hostel. About that also, I think we'll have to really very judiciously see to it that the funds are utilized. No?
This time they have moved the Saksham Anganwadi into Part B.
Part B, correct.
Yes, they have.
Everybody is going to Part B. Correct.
Yes, they have.
Crash
This year.
still remains. Crash
Yes,
still in Part B. Yeah, correct.
So can I move on to the audience questions?
Yes.
Yeah. So one question is like, are gender tax incentives such as reduced stamp duty for property registered in a woman's name, are they an effective tool for promoting genuine asset ownership among women?
Yeah. First time it was done by Madhya Pradesh, CM of Madhya Pradesh, and after that they saw at least nominal transfers had taken place. They may not have a right to decide what they, but I think even everywhere now, with the reduction of stamp duty, women have either become a joint owner or sometimes the property land is in women's name. To what extent do they have a decision-making power or even utilization of this property? That is a question. But I think, yeah, it has helped.
On papers it has.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another, I think this is a comment from somebody from Jharkhand. In sports, the facilities and per unit cost for all activity sessions should not be different at all. Rather, facility should be more towards women sports person. In Jharkhand, presently, women-friendly GP training is being organized, and we are taking sessions on how plans should be made through gender lens in GPDP. So I think this is
but then what you need is the gender training of sports authorities of India. I have come across, like in the grievance cell of National Commission and the State Commission, that they are so macho and they are so many of them are very misogynist also. So I think what you need is a Ministry of Sports. You need a they just treat women, sports women, as a piece of furniture. They don't even see them as a human being, no? So, and there has been so many complaints. I have been part of those posh committees where such issues were being discussed, no? So I think gender sensitization of mandatory gender, the way Labor Ministry does mandatory gender sensitization of all the bureaucrats, right from the clerks, like in the accounts department, to this. So I think similarly, Sports Ministry needs to do that.
Yeah, and they need to connect with Ministry of Education because sports starts at school, and there are several interventions taking place by community organizations for improving women's participation in sport at the school level. And poor things, they back out because the education ministry, I mean, there is no backup of the education ministry. They do it at the behest of some government programs, the sport, youth affairs and sport has announced. But then, because the education ministry has a completely different pathway for moving girls up into the from the primary to the secondary, they drop out of sports once they start moving from primary to secondary. There is no provision for having. So those connections need to be made.
Even the discrimination in food, no, which is between boys and girls, they are given such a nice, sumptuous, healthy, high protein diet, which girls are not given. They are just given chapati, dal, and rice, no. So that also affects their performance, no, into the rigorous exercises that they do.
So, ma'am, it's 4. If you want to,
no, I have not received the call. I told
okay. Then there is another question. If large numbers of women are entering the labor sector but are concentrated in underpaid or minimum wage work, can we genuinely describe this as progress? When a housekeeper educated up to 5th standard earns wages comparable to a software engineer, does this indicate advancement in employment agency capability and overall well-being? Or does it reveal deeper structural distortions in the labor market? It's a question from Ms. Sulojana. Either of you can answer the question.
I mean, I can take it up, but I'm just...
Yeah.
So obviously it is not. One of the things that I began by saying that the increasing participation of women in the labor force does not guarantee that we have to celebrate those numbers. And here we find that when the women's labor force participation has increased, the earnings have actually dropped. And the increase has come on the back of self-employed women, and self-employed earnings have reduced. The self-employed earning gaps in gender have increased. We would never call that something that we would be celebrating. On the other, so therefore, there is a big concern and big worry about how to improve the incomes of self-employed women who have who are being shown so much in numbers. So that is one thing that needs to be talked about. And I think the government understands and recognizes this. Otherwise, they would not have announced these she-marts and these working women's hostels. They have done that, but it comes with such pittance. The allocations are such pittance that's not going to make any impact. How is the government actually looking for? Mobilizing money for supporting these programs. We have seen the Mudra loans, it created more chaos than providing any empowerment to women. 25,000 rupees as credit cannot start a business for any woman that is actually the woman who is actually aspiring to become an entrepreneur. It can at best give her money to open a pan bidi or cigarette shop at some naka. And even that is not enough because eventually she will not be able to scale up and she can actually stop that once that credit gets over. Now, that is obviously something. So what we need to create respectable, decent work along the lines of decent work criteria of the ILO, the work around according to those standards. What is happening and when you say software engineer, I'm tempted to again talk about this whole AI boom, which is happening. And we are saying that we're going to be the world leaders in AI modeling and supply of AI. But what is it doing? It is actually coming at the back of all women from remote areas, especially Adivasi women. Kerala in Manakkar is one of the foremost centers where women from remote areas, and Jharkhand is another place from where from women from the Adivasi communities are actually working to build the AI learning models, and they are called by names like data analyst, data processor, data this, data that, anything that gives a sense of respectability to the designation. So when you say software engineer, I am just thinking that software engineer as a connotation can actually be so many things, and therefore they can actually get a wage which is so low, which is not equivalent to somebody working at the multinational as a software engineer. So it can be, because designations can be inflated, they can give these respectable names to the designations, yet create jobs which are much lower in worth and value, and keep the people grounded and bounded by those value chains. I mean, at those lower levels in the value chains.
It's like
So,
calling gig workers partner.
yes, and exactly, calling
Washing off
the
all
gig
your responsibilities of social security.
calling the service delivery as partners, as executives, all of these, so on the one hand we need to create jobs, have regulations on what we are actually creating, and then we have to put a stop somewhere by generating awareness that these designations mean nothing.
Correct.
These have to be reworked.
And the responsibilities, no, of social
Yeah.
security to
I mean,
protect the minimum
basically one
wages.
has to just see that how these designations of or the name of the occupations are matching with the skill levels.
Correct. And review of the labor codes, no, most of the labor codes, all 4 labor codes, they hardly see women as workers or women as a contributor to the economy. They are so gender is absent in the labor code, except for maternity benefits, nowhere it comes. Even sexual harassment at workplace is also not there in labor code. You have to have a criminal complaint if you want a redressal, no? So, yeah.
Yeah, there are a few comments as well. So there is a comment saying that there should be mandatory to make gender cell in each department who can
That is
decide what are
mandatory.
the
It is
gender
mandatory,
intervention. I think state-wise. And also the credit system actually has created multiple burden of proving themselves as best housewives, best farmers, best entrepreneurs. There is another interesting question. So should marriage-based schemes be part of gender budget? Because for that question, I think I had an interesting conversation with one of the additional secretaries serving in Kerala government. So what she was also asking me, there is a particular scheme where some kind of support is given for women for marriage. So even she was saying, like, it doesn't make sense at all why we are providing, I mean, why we are doing that kind of schemes. It's actually reaffirming the gender norms that we have. So,
but sadly,
dowry
state governments put them.
Gujarat also is only buying
State governments do show it as part of the gender budgeting, because I remember in Madhya Pradesh when the dowry, the state government was providing dowry for girls' marriage. It was part of the gender budget, and then we had to go and intervene and tell them that you cannot do this. This is illegal.
Even initially, conditional cash transfer, which they had for this, that was for career of a boy and marriage of a girl. So in several state governments you had. In Gujarat, we had a scheme called Kumri Bainu Mameru. That is, Mameru is nothing what mama gives as a dowry, no? So that scheme was there.
Yeah. So, one more question, like how far does monitoring and evaluation frameworks work well? Like with respect to, like we have the outcome monitoring framework of NITI Aayog and all that to monitor the real impact of schemes. So how does it work in actual sense?
There are so many organizations which are doing monitoring and evaluation, and some of them have had a very good results in terms of, say, in a sugar belt area where the enrollment of children was very limited because they were migrant workers. They were used to be for 4 months in Maharashtra and 8 months in either Gujarat or Rajasthan. So that scheme of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, why did it succeed? So that was the reason, and as a result of which 3 states came together and they came up with a migrating teachers. So along with the community, they also migrate. Another thing in Rajasthan, Dushra Dashak, why the adolescent in the age group of 10 or 20 were not in the school, because they were going in a caravan along with a family. So they also came, Rajasthan came up in the literacy education department, came up with that kind of a scheme where the teacher would also travel with the community, no? And another thing was that after Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was implemented in so many areas where child labor among boys reduced, but their role was taken over by their sisters. And then the evaluation report only showed that now there are more percentage of girl children have increased, no? So so then the correction was made that 30% of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan money should be dedicated to girls. And if any school says that we don't have a single girl, they'll have to report what are the reasons why they are not there, whether they are looking after younger siblings or whether there is the lack of transport. Then the cycle scheme also in Bihar, which became a very for election, Bihar election, it became a very successful mantra. So this kind of area-based monitoring and also by at a local area studies have proved very important in last 20 years of time, like the designing of Balika Samriddhi Yojana, where they had not specified how the money would be channelized. Maternity benefit scheme, they had not even defined whether maternity benefit should go before when she's pregnant or after the birth of a children. So except for Kerala, none of the state had utilized money because bureaucrats were not clear that when should they give. So when a pregnant woman applied for maternity benefit, she was told, where is the child? And when she applied after the delivery, they said, but you have already delivered. Why do you need maternity benefits? No. So changing in the designs, and I think what Saida Hamidji did very nice in that 10th and 11th and 12th 5-year plan, that window to, they started solution exchange portal in collaboration with UNDP. So whatever problems you encounter at a ground level about the gender budgeting, you can discuss in that, you can post that this thing, and then everyone pitches in from their experiences and find the solution of it. So that was a very good exercise that happened nearly for 10 years. No? Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, both of you. Since we are concluding this, I would like to ask, what are your concluding remarks? Like how we can improve the systems that are currently in place?
Sonaji?
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to start?
Yeah.
So I will be very brief because I also have a call which is just coming in.
Sure.
But the thing is that, I mean, I want to say that what we need to do for a successful gender responsive budgeting. I think we have come a long way. 21 years is not small, and there is a need to revisit what has happened in 21 years, what we have gained. There is a discussion on that. The government of Kerala, every 5 to 7 years, have actually revisited the way they have looked at their gender planning integration exercise, which is why they are so successful. In India, we have gone at the national level, we have gone in circles. First, we would say that, okay, this needs more capacity building at the state level, and then we would do capacity building, and then we would come back to say that, okay, the gender budget statement needs to be strengthened, and then we would again go back. It is high time that the monitoring and evaluation, there has to be a framework. The framework, there are several frameworks, what Vibhuti ma'am was saying, and then there are others also. There are several monitoring and evaluation frameworks that can be adopted at a central level. Capacity building on gender audits and monitoring and evaluation at the state levels and the union ministries who have adopted gender budget has to be done. That is going to provide the pathway to see how expenditures have transformed into outcome indicators, actual indicators, and whether the gaps have been closed or not. And there are several of those frameworks and methods and methodologies. I think the government needs to spend money to adopt the framework in capacity building of the officers, so that the audits and the monitoring and evaluation should be carried out within the government system and not outsourced to NGOs or non-profit organizations. They do great job, but they also depend on ad hoc flow of resources. When they have resources, they do it. When they don't have, they are not able to. For the government to adopt the second phase of GRB successfully, to move towards closing the gap, there has to be capacity building in terms of training the officials, not only in understanding entry points and allocating budgets, but also to mark and chart the pathway of expenditure allocation to outcome indicators.
Very good, because scheme-centric approach is eccentric, and that she said the advocacy is crazy. I would like to add only two more points. Is gender disaggregated data, about which I think Sanamita ji always says. And second one is the digital authentication should not be mandatory, because that's how I think that has become now a way of depriving most of the people, excluding them from the funds and also their due, whatever is due to them, no? So we need to find solution to digitalization is not a success mantra. It has so many glitches and so many problems. So we need to be sensitive to that so that the people are not deprived of the funds. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you to all the panelists, Dr. Sona ma'am and Dr. Vibhuti ma'am, for the thoughtful and substantive contributions. So I think we have covered a lot of points. We started with like should we prioritize outcomes over allocations, and I think we have almost agreed upon that we need to strengthen the systems. We need to have better M&D frameworks and capacity building. And also I think we addressed the care economy, like why the invisible care economy, why they are not getting into the whole metrics. And also the dilution of women-specific schemes, especially in Part A. Some of them which have supposedly to be in Part B are figuring in Part A, and Part C is getting a lot of allocations with the past 2 years. And I think we also talked about how important it is to physically decentralize this, like whether we should have, not whether, we should have more gender responsive planning and execution at the lower levels of the government who interact directly with the community because they better know the community. And I think we also discussed about the intersectionality as well, because very few states have that intersectionality perspective being integrated into the gender budget statements, like Kerala have the transgender budget and all that, but we are not following the course in the other parts of the country. So I think we have enough, we've discussed a lot of points, and I think this conversation should continue. And I think there are many other questions also in the chat box, but considering the time, I think we will discuss them later. So on behalf of Center for Public Policy Research, I extend my sincere thanks to our speakers and to the audience for engaging in this dialogue. The conversation on gender budgeting, in many ways, a conversation about the kind of development trajectory that we envision. So I hope today's exchange contributes to the strengthening both the analytical rigor and the policy ambition of that effort. Thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to your participation in the future editions of CPPR Dialogue. Good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. It was really very nice. We complimented each other, Dr. Sona, Amitra, and myself.
Thank you so much for all the thoughtful questions.
Thank you.
Very thoughtful questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.